Welcome back to the Holy Discussion. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends. And make sure to hit that bell icon so you don't miss out on future deep dives. Okay, so today we're diving into a story that really grabbed me. It's a personal testimony, and I have to say it's one of the most powerful examples of redemption and transformation I've ever come across.
I know what you mean. It's really something. We're going to be exploring the life of a man named David, and his journey of faith is just remarkable.
It's like, buckle up, folks, because this is a roller coaster. We're talking about a guy who went from a really rough childhood through some serious darkness to ultimately finding peace and purpose through faith, and that's not even the half of it.
Right. And what's fascinating is how it's not a straight line from point A to point B. There are these incredible highs and lows moments where you think he's found his way and then, bam, something happens. It really makes you think about how faith works, how change happens.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. David's early life was, to put it mildly, challenging. He talks about feeling abandoned and unstable from a very young age.
Yeah. His story starts in Mexico. He was raised by a single mother who really struggled to provide for him and his brother. At one point, they were even left at an orphanage while she went to the U.S. to try and find work.
Wow. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for him as a child. That feeling of being left behind, it has to leave a mark.
It definitely did. David talks about how that experience shaped his view of the world, his sense of security, even his relationship with God later on. He had this deep-seated fear of abandonment, and it manifested in different ways throughout his life.
But even amidst those difficult circumstances, there were glimpses of faith, right? He had some early exposure to the gospel through a local church. I'm curious, did that provide any sense of comfort or stability for him at the time?
It's interesting because it seems like it did, but only to a point. He went to church, even participated in this bicycle raffle, where he had to bring a van full of kids to win. Almost like he was drawn to the community aspect of it, the sense of belonging.
That makes sense, especially given the instability he experienced at home. It's like he was searching for that sense of connection somewhere, anywhere.
Exactly. But as he got older, entered his teenage years, all those unresolved issues, those questions about his absent father, his own identity, it all started bubbling to the surface. And instead of turning towards faith, he actually started to rebel.
It's almost like a classic coming-of-age story, right? But in this case, the stakes are so much higher because it's intertwined with his faith. What did that rebellion look like for him? Was it a sudden shift or more of a gradual turning away?
It seems like a bit of both. He talks about having this vivid dream about the rapture where he's left behind while everyone else ascends to heaven. It's clearly a wake-up call, a warning sign, but at that point he chooses to ignore it.
Wow, talk about a scary dream. You'd think that would be enough to send anyone running back to church. But teenagers, right. They have a way of pushing back against anything that feels forced or restrictive. What happened after the dream? Did he just completely abandon his faith?
Not entirely. He still believed in God, but he started questioning everything. Why was his life so hard? Where was God in all of this? And those unanswered questions led him down a pretty dark path. He started partying, drinking, trying to find himself in all the wrong places.
It's like he was trying to outrun those deeper questions, those existential anxieties, but we all know that never really works, does it? Those things tend to catch up with you eventually. Did he ever try to reconcile these conflicting feelings, the pull towards faith and this urge to rebel? Did he ever talk to anyone about it?
He mentions feeling incredibly isolated during this period. Like, he couldn't talk to anyone about what he was going through, not his family, not his friends. He was trapped in his own head, wrestling with these huge questions, and ultimately he chose to numb the pain instead of confronting it head on.
That's heartbreaking, especially considering he had that initial connection with the church community. It makes you wonder if things might have been different if he'd had someone to confide in, someone who could have guided him through those turbulent years.
It definitely makes you think about the importance of mentorship, of having a strong support system, especially during those formative years. But unfortunately for David, those years were marked by poor choices and painful consequences.
Yeah. He ended up getting married young, becoming a father. But he was still carrying all that baggage from his childhood, and it started to affect his relationships. The transcript mentions infidelity and addiction. Were those issues already present before the marriage?
It sounds like they were already simmering beneath the surface. The marriage, instead of being a source of stability, actually amplified his struggles. He felt trapped, overwhelmed by responsibility, and he turned to those familiar coping mechanisms, partying, drinking, eventually even drugs.
So it's like he was seeking solace in all the wrong places. And as we know, those temporary fixes only lead to more pain and further isolation. It's a vicious cycle, isn't it? At what point did things really start to spiral out of control?
Well, after his marriage fell apart and he was separated from his children, things took a very dark turn. He describes his descent into cocaine and alcohol addiction as a complete loss of control, a feeling of utter despair.
It's a stark reminder of how addiction can completely hijack a person's life, their relationships, everything. But even in this darkness, there's a glimmer of hope. He talks about praying to God, acknowledging his powerlessness, and crying out for help.
Yeah, that's the turning point, isn't it? Like, he hit rock bottom, and in that moment of desperation, he finally surrendered. He said he prayed for God to either take him or change him because he couldn't do it on his own anymore.
That's powerful, isn't it? That raw honesty, admitting you're at the end of your rope. You mentioned this is a turning point, but it wasn't an instant fix, was it? What happened next?
You're right. It wasn't a sudden miraculous transformation. But there's this shift in his perspective, a willingness to finally let go and let God take the reins. And around this time, he meets the woman who would become his wife. Now she plays a crucial role in his journey.
Hold on. He meets his future wife while he's still struggling with addiction. That's got to be a complicated dynamic. What was her role? Was she trying to fix him?
It's actually more nuanced than that. She didn't try to force him into changing or put pressure on him to clean up his act. Instead, she just loved him consistently, unconditionally, and she kept pointing him back to God's word.
That's remarkable, especially considering the state he was in. It makes you wonder, was it her faith that drew her to him? Or did she see something in him, some glimmer of goodness that maybe even he couldn't see at the time?
It's probably a bit of both. She saw the potential in him, the person he could become, and her unwavering faith was a constant source of strength and inspiration for him. You know, it's like that verse in Proverbs, iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another.
That's a great analogy. They were sharpening each other, pushing each other towards growth, even if it wasn't always pretty. But her love and faith alone weren't enough to completely break him free from his addiction, right? There had to be more to the story.
There were a few key moments. One was a serious illness he went through. It was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of his own mortality. And it forced him to confront his pain, his fear, his anger, all those emotions he'd been trying to numb for years.
Wow, it's amazing how sometimes it takes a major life event to shake us out of our complacency. It's like we need that jolt to remind us of what truly matters. But even with the illness and his wife's support, something was still holding him back. What finally pushed him over the edge, so to speak.
He describes this moment of intense emotional honesty, a breakdown really, where he completely surrenders to God. He realizes he can't fight this battle alone anymore. He needs God's help.
Oh.
And in that moment, he experiences this profound encounter with God's love, a feeling of complete forgiveness and acceptance.
So it was a combination of factors, hitting rock bottom, his future wife's unwavering love, a life-threatening illness, and then this emotional breakthrough where he finally lets go of his pride and surrenders to God's grace.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is. And, you know, it's not like after this moment everything was perfect. He still had setbacks, moments of weakness, but there was a fundamental shift in his mindset. His desire for change, for a life free from addiction, became stronger than the pull of his old habits.
It's like those layers of hurt, those defense mechanisms he'd built up over the years were slowly being peeled away. But we haven't even talked about the strip club encounter yet. That's the part that really blew my mind.
Right. So picture this. He's still battling those old urges, those familiar patterns, and he finds himself in a strip club feeling completely lost and defeated.
Yeah.
It's like he's taking a step back into the darkness he just escaped from.
That's unexpected. You'd think a place like that would be the opposite of a spiritual awakening. What happened? Was it a moment of clarity, like, what am I doing here? Actually, it's even more surprising than that. He ends up having a conversation with the restroom attendant who turns out to be a pastor.
Whoa, hold on. A pastor in a strip club. That's a story in itself.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this wasn't just a casual, hey, how's the weather kind of chat.
Definitely not. They get into a deep conversation about faith, about redemption, and the pastor ends up praying with him right there in the restroom. And for David, that simple act of prayer was transformative.
Okay, now that's what I call divine intervention.
Mm-hmm.
It's like God was saying, look, I'm here for you, even in the most unexpected places. It's a powerful reminder that His grace is available to us no matter where we are, no matter what we've done.
Exactly. And for David, it was a confirmation that he was on the right path, that God hadn't given up on him, even when he'd given up on himself.
So did this strip club encounter mark the end of his struggles? Was it all smooth sailing from there?
Well, it was a major turning point, but like we said before, transformation is a journey, not a destination. He still had to work through those ingrained patterns, those temptations that kept popping up. But now he had a renewed sense of purpose, a deep understanding of God's grace, and a support system that was rooting for him every step of the way.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the power of forgiveness, right? how it can completely shift the dynamic of a relationship. I mean, talk about second chances.
Yeah.
But, speaking of relationships, what about his family? Did they experience this transformation with him? Were they a part of his healing process?
That's a great question because, transformation isn't just an individual thing. It ripples outwards. It affects the people around us.
Yeah.
And in David's case, his family played a huge role in his journey.
So it wasn't just about him finding God. It was about rebuilding those broken relationships, those bridges that had been burned by his past choices.
Exactly. And it wasn't easy. It took time, patience, forgiveness on both sides. But eventually they were able to come together as a family again, stronger than ever.
It's almost like they all went through a transformation together, right? Each one playing their part in this larger story of redemption and healing. It's really beautiful.
It is, and it speaks to the power of family, the way those bonds can endure even through the toughest times. But what really strikes me about David's story is that it's not just about happy endings or fairy tale transformations.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't shy away from the fact that life is still messy, that he still faces challenges. He doesn't pretend that everything is perfect now that he's found God.
Exactly. He's honest about the fact that transformation is a journey, not a destination. He still has moments of weakness, still makes mistakes. But the difference now is that he has a foundation of faith to fall back on.
It's like he's built this toolbox of coping mechanisms, healthy habits, and spiritual practices that help him navigate those rough patches. It's not about being perfect. It's about having the tool to get back on track when you stumble.
Right, and it's about having that support system, those people who love and support him unconditionally. That's crucial for anyone going through a major life change, whether it's related to faith or anything else.
I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from David's story, the importance of community, of having people who believe in you, who support you on your journey.
Absolutely. We're not meant to go through life alone. We need each other. We need that encouragement, that accountability, that sense of belonging.
It makes you realize that transformation isn't just about changing yourself. It's about building a life that supports that change and network of relationships that help you stay grounded and connected.
It's about creating a space where you can be vulnerable, where you can share your struggles and your triumphs without fear of judgment.
I think that's so important in today's world where everything seems so filtered and perfect. We need to be reminded that it's okay to not be okay, that we're all works in progress.
Exactly. And that's what David's story does. It reminds us that we're all on a journey, that there will be ups and downs, but that through it all, God's grace is sufficient.
Beautifully said. And, I think there's another important message here, the power of sharing our stories. Like David's willingness to be vulnerable, to talk openly about his struggles and his triumphs. That's what makes his testimony so impactful.
It's like he's giving us permission to do the same, to embrace our own imperfections, to share our own messy journeys.
Because when we do that, when we share our stories authentically, it creates this ripple effect. It gives others the courage to do the same.
It breaks down those walls of isolation and shame. It reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles and that there's hope for healing and transformation no matter what we've been through.
So powerful. And as we wrap up this deep dive into David's incredible journey, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. What's your story? What are those defining moments, those turning points that have shaped who you are today?
Take some time to reflect on your own journey, the highs, the lows, the moments of grace that have brought you to where you are right now. And ask yourself, how can you use your story to inspire others, to offer hope to those who are still struggling?
Because your story matters. It has the power to change lives, to bring light into the darkness, and to remind us that even in the midst of brokenness, God is still working, restoring, redeeming, and making all things new.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into David's story. We hope it's encouraged you, challenged you, and inspired you to embrace your own journey of transformation.
And until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep sharing your light with the world.